Okay, maybe I should start slowly. Welcome to the webinar today of TRUEDEM. As you know, TRUEDEM is an international research project under the Horizon program. And the topic of today's webinar is closeness to citizens as a source for political trust, a comparison of opinions on local parliaments and the European Parliament. The speaker today is Professor Elisabeth Donat. Professor Donat is working at the Department of European Policy and the Study of Democracy in Krems in Austria. She is working at the University of Continuing Education in Krems. And I have strong links with Krems because I did my complete secondary education in Krems in the gymnasium there. So I'm very pleased to have a distinguished scholar from Krems as a speaker today. So Professor Donat is at the moment Deputy Head of Department, and she holds a degree in Sociology at the University of Vienna, and her research focused on the causes and consequences of the digital divide. Prior to her current appointment, she taught and conducted research at the sociology departments of the University of Vienna, Innsbruck, and Salzburg. Having completed extensive training in qualitative and quantitative social science method, she has taught methodological courses in more than 50 elements across universities of applied science. Her research is interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary in orientation, with a particular interest in the role of subnational regions in Europe's multi-level governance system. Professor Donat, the floor is yours.
So, welcome everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar and for this kind introduction. You are very welcome to visit Krems again. Perhaps we find an opportunity for a guest lecture or something like that. I would really appreciate this. Concerning my presentation today, it's going to be about the paper I've written together with a colleague of mine, Simon Lehnhardt, and it has been published in the International Review of Administrative Sciences, I think last year. And it is entitled Closeness to Citizens as a Source for Political Trust, a Comparison of Opinions on Local Parliaments and the European Parliament. And what my presentation will include today is, of course, this paper, but I thought in order to make it more interesting, since perhaps some of you already noticed the paper or even read it, I added some fresh results from our research supporting our arguments or our research interest. So the presentation will include some new elements as well. So a brief outline about what is going to happen in the next 30 minutes or so. I'm going to start with some conceptual considerations on this notion of closeness to citizens, a very ambivalent concept, so to speak. And we are going to focus on three dimensions or three aspects that are mentioned in research. The first one is about physical distance. The second one is about, so to speak, sameness in terms of descriptive representation. And the third one is about congruence in opinions. Next, I'm going to present you the underlying data and the research questions and hypotheses. And the main part will be, of course, dedicated to the results. And I'm going to conclude with some discussion. The subnational level, namely the local or regional level in the EU, is often deemed to be closer to citizens. And Pierre Tony states in this regard that thanks to the involvement of lower levels of governance, policymaking can more closely reflect local citizens' preferences and hence be more legitimate. So the question of closeness is often also associated with questions of political legitimacy. The subnational level itself, as you know, finds itself somehow in a sandwich position. So it is responsible for implementing EU legislation on the one hand side, but it's also sometimes expected to communicate the advantages or benefits of the EU to its citizens due to this hypothesized direct linkage that exists. In addition, our paper was concerned with the phenomenon of nested trust in the EU's multi-level system. So generating and restoring trust by reputational spillover. So this addresses the question whether we can assume that trust from institutions at the lower levels in the EU spills up to the upper levels or vice versa. The data we have used was collected within a multi-annual international research project, the RegioPAL project, which was concerned with the role of regional parliaments in EU's multi-level system. And within this project, we did a survey with regional MPs and another survey with citizens in 12 regions in 6 EU member states. And you can see the selection of countries and states in the table on the right-hand side. So there has been a survey in Germany, in Austria, France, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Spain. We have chosen 2 contrasting regions per member state, and we considered several indicators. I will show you more on the next slide. So we considered the geography. We aimed at having states and regions in Western and Eastern Europe, in Southern Europe, and so on. We considered the different political systems, the size of population, economic strength, and many more. The survey among citizens was conducted in 2022, and the survey of regional MPs a little bit earlier in 2021. And in the case of citizens, it has been an online survey with a quota sample, and the quota was fulfilled quite well, but we have some slightly more higher educated respondents in Poland. So concerning the selection of regions and countries, there's another depiction of our selection where you can see that we aimed at having a rather huge region per country and a smaller one, that we acknowledge the different GDP per capita, that we also discussed a lot about regional identity, and we tried to not to quantify it, but we engaged with country experts. We consulted survey results and so on, and tried to form our mind on this issue as well. We considered the political system and the role of regions in it in terms, for example, among others, with the Regional Authority Index, which displays the regional authority within a country, and it's an index that can range between 0 and 30 points. So the more points regions have in this index, the more competences and the more influence they have within this country. And of course, EU membership, the countries and regions vary along the dimension when they access the European Union. Turning again to the conceptual considerations, as I already said in the beginning, we discussed a lot in this project about the concept of closeness to citizens. And we tried to find out what is actually meant by this closeness to citizens, a term that can be also found quite often in administrative sciences when it comes to reduce hurdles or barriers for citizens to access public services. It's quite difficult to find a precise scientific definition or term. And it seemed to us that it's more kind of political buzzword than really a scientific concept. And it's especially promoted by political actors themselves, for example, the European Committee of Regions. When you engage in a literature review on closeness, this concept of closeness to citizens, perhaps you will find some 3 dimensions that are addressed in this respect, more or less concrete, referring to this closeness, but it seems to be that physical distance is an important thing in this context. Sameness in terms of descriptive representation and congruence on opinions. And I think we can agree that all of this has to do something with the notion of trust. So we get a blurry picture, but we perhaps will find those 3 dimensions addressed in the context of political representation and closeness to citizens. So the overall hypothesis behind this is perhaps what Lev Kofridi has stated, that we assume that small distance is associated with high congruence between politicians and citizens and high closeness, whereas large distance implies low congruence and perhaps some alienation of politicians and citizens. Coming to the first dimension, physical proximity, as I just explained, perhaps the hypothesis behind is that this physical proximity allows for personal encounters with citizens, and thereby the subnational level is able to address local and regional problems immediately. And this physical proximity is often measured, for example, by the indicator of district magnitude. So large districts impede personal encounters and direct accountability, but we find mixed results in research concerning this inference of district magnitude. In their study on French and Portuguese MPs, Prakost and Teixeira, find that close contacts of MPs with the local level reflect a politically correct discourse rather than an actual practice. So they have been very critical with this notion. And they are stating that this refers to the impact of the patterns of political careers and to a politically correct narrative instead, compared to an actual practice or engagement in those contexts. Another survey, the party rep survey, used constituency work as an indicator for this personal engagement and contacts, and found that an average constituency member is approximately 115 hours per month physically present in the constituency, but they also find huge differences in their country comparisons. So just to address a few aspects, when you look at the column displaying the percentage of MPs engaging in a surgery, we find that it's very common in Ireland and Poland, for example, but not that common in the Netherlands, Norway, or Switzerland. And when you look at the last column of this table, MPs engage in any of these activities, this constituency work, once again, we see that it's rather common in Ireland and Poland at the time of the survey, but rather uncommon in Switzerland. The second dimension that is perhaps addressed when researchers engage with this notion of closeness to citizens is some kind of sameness in terms of descriptive representation, recognizing the territorial background of MPs and citizens. So the assumption behind is that if representatives are well known as inhabitants of the municipality or the region itself, then citizens will feel close. But research has found that this is only relevant to citizens who especially identify with the region, and that this does not naturally imply substantive representation and responsiveness. In addition, the importance of substantive representation has been found to overrule all other aspects of representation from the viewpoints of citizens. So it's not that much about descriptive representation, but more of having the feeling to be represented in a substantial way. Also including the aspect of electoral accountability. Turning to the third dimension of this closeness to citizens, the idea of congruence. That's what I brought along from our recent research, our own surveys among citizens and regional MPs. We asked in our survey whether regions should take Europe more seriously in their political work, and when we compare the attitudes of citizens, these are the dark bars, and the attitudes of regional MPs, these are the light bars at the bottom of each graph. We find some congruence between the attitudes of citizens and regional MPs. We have, of course, the case of the Eurosceptic French, but overall we see that citizens and MPs are quite congruent when it comes to policy or issue congruence. Conversely, when we ask about procedural congruence, in terms of preferences for representational styles, for instance, we find that citizens and regional MPs have diverging opinions. So the notion that the subnational level is always closer to citizens and knows very well what citizens want and behaves accordingly is somehow challenged by these results. So what we find is that citizens are more often in preference for the delegate model of representation, which you can find in many other surveys and research papers as well. And regional MPs more often prefer a trustee or partisan model of representation. So summarizing all these conceptual considerations, we find that physical proximity and contact of representatives and citizens is perhaps sometimes a bit overrated when we remember those pictures I showed in the beginning from the politicians engaging in events and marketplaces and so on. Also the notion of sameness and descriptive representation is perhaps not that important in this respect. And we have also seen in third place that results concerning congruence at the subnational level, according to our survey, are mixed, are providing mixed evidence. So it's not the case that the subnational level is always that close to citizens. So now turning more and more to our paper, what is then closeness to citizens and which role does trust play in this regard, especially at the subnational level? And what we tried to figure out in this paper was the influence of contact, which is of course related to physical proximity, and of expertise, which perhaps is somehow related also to this problem of substantive representation, and how those two aspects relate with the notion of trust. Our theoretical background in this paper was provided or mainly built on the work of Giddens, which we found useful in this regard, since he distinguishes two ways of establishing trust in his theory of time-space distanciation and the reflexivity of modernity. So Giddens says in pre-modern and local societies, facework commitment is the most important way to build trust. It requires situations of co-presence, and it is typical for those pre-modern societies. Whereas in modern societies, we have to rely on faceless commitment, which he also terms expertise or defines as expertise, and as faith in symbolic tokens or expert systems. And it is linked to citizens via different access points, and Giddens gives the example of elections. What we did in our survey, when we thought of an indicator for expertise, we asked citizens how they perceive the knowledge of the MPs of living conditions and opinions of citizens. And we engaged a lot in discussions about this measurement, because what we tried to avoid was a rather populist notion of this expertise. We also discussed about MPs fulfilling the wishes and needs of citizens and so on, but we felt that we have to rely on a more objective, neutral, plural measurement of this knowledge. Turning to the research questions of our paper, we were then asking what influence do different indicators this facework and faceless commitment have on trust in parliaments. And as I said in the beginning, we have also been interested in spillover effects, and there are two competing theses in this regard. The first one is the proximity thesis, which relies very much on this notion of physical closeness and proximity, stating that local parliaments serve as a source of trust in other parliaments. And conversely to this, the congruence and compensation theory, stating that national parliaments actually serve as a benchmark for the evaluation of the European Parliament, for example. Turning to the hypothesis, so we assumed that perceived expertise of MPs is more important than personal contact, since we are dealing with these modern societies. And concerning the spillover effects, we tested whether subnational parliaments can be a source of trust for the European Parliament, and the competing theory about institutional saliency, that national parliaments serve as a benchmark for trust in the European Parliament. We included several control variables, namely age, gender, education, region, residential area, and knowledge about parliaments. Turning to our results, at first we compared the trust in parliaments, and we indeed find that the subnational level receives quite high levels of trust. So the local and regional parliaments are trusted very often. On the other hand side, we have been a bit surprised that the European Parliament, facing all this discussion about physical proximity and contact and so on, also does very well from our point of view. So subnational level seems to receive this high levels of trust, but we found that the European Parliament is also trusted quite often. We have also been interested in various forms of contacts with those different parliaments, and we asked about classical contacts or in-person contacts and about virtual contacts. Once again, we found that overall, one has to say or admit that the level of contacts is, of course, not that high, but the subnational level again receives more interaction and engages more in contacts compared to the national and European level. We had 3 types of virtual contacts, so to speak: visit the homepage, send a social media message, or post a message, and those virtual contacts do not happen that often compared to the in-person contacts. And finally, we computed regression analysis with the 2 dependent variables, trust in local parliament and trust in European Parliament. And at first place, we found that the socio-demographic variables did not yield any huge influence. There are significances, but the sample is really large, as you might have recognized, so one can expect this. The regions do not differ very much, so once again, coefficients are comparatively low. What has been important in this regard, of course, is the self-assessed knowledge of citizens about Parliament. This variable yielded some effect, and comparing our main variables, our main research interests, the variable measuring contact with Parliament and the other one measuring expertise, we find that perceived expertise is obviously more important for trust building than having contact with those parliaments. Concerning the second part of our analysis, the spillover effects, we found that trust in local parliament and trust in regional parliament are somehow associated or brought together by the respondents, whereas the trust in the European Parliament is associated to the trust in the national parliament. So respondents somehow differentiate between those institutions and obviously find something common in the local and regional parliament and in the national and European Parliament. So summarized, we found that perceived expertise is more important than direct contact. So the importance of physical proximity for generating trust is perhaps at least limited to some extent. We found spillover effects, but we had to reject this second hypothesis, the proximity thesis. And we found mixed evidence for the third hypothesis, the spillover from national to European Parliament. And perhaps one advantage of the subnational level in terms of trust, aside from this contact and expertise thing, when we think of other factors, is perhaps its media presence at the local and regional level, which is this demonstration of expertise, and the lack of European public sphere that we still experience. And finally, turning to the discussion of all this, so the relevance for the subnational level in promoting European integration is perhaps limited because proximity is not that crucial, it seems, and we found no spillover effects in this regard. And citizens obviously neither expect politicians to visit every marketplace, as we have seen in the beginning, and local events, nor do they expect perhaps complete congruence, which is sometimes assumed, but they want politicians to have this expertise about opinions and living conditions. And this expertise can be generated, of course, by consulting citizens and engaging in direct contact, but also, in my point of view, by consulting social sciences analysis and reports. We have seen the importance of substantive representation in this regard, and what we tried somehow with our analysis is also perhaps to deconstruct a little bit this notion of closeness of the subnational level, which we found is used very often, but in a very blurry and very simple and politically motivated way. So concluding, perhaps the subnational level has some limited relevance in this regard, and this notion of closeness might be sometimes a bit overrated in its importance if it's taken in a worldly sense. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this very impressive presentation. And maybe introduce to you also to Professor Pippa Norris from Harvard University. She's in the audience, and she is co-PI of our project. And Professor Ladislav Chabada, he's the national director of our project in Czech Republic. So just to introduce. Okay, now the Q&A session is beginning, so please either raise your hand or write on chat, and then the floor is open for the whole audience. Okay. It's interesting, the result that being in markets and local events like Oktoberfest does not really help in this respect. Professor Norris, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I really wanted to ask about the policy implications. So when you're advising countries to think about how they design their systems and devolve powers and things like that, and what roles and responsibilities representatives have, what do you think you'd recommend from the lessons from the research for what we should be doing? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a good one, because what we try to demonstrate is that this notion of context is context is overrated, and that it's more about substantive representation, and perhaps that's an old one, but communicating the results from political work to citizens, and being authentic in this way, and really trying to demonstrate that you take these living conditions and opinions serious without being populistic in this manner, is, I think, still an important aspect of engaging with citizens.
Yes, it's very interesting, because in Austria we had a politician, and he was from some right-wing party, and he had in his car different outfits for hunters, lederhosen, for academics, ties. So he was always going to the next event, local event, and if there was some tent with beer, he took out all his leather trousers, and if he was talking to academics, he got his suit and his tie. He was all in the car, so this was extreme populism by trying to dress like your audience. But your study is somehow indicating this doesn't really help to be an actor who is acting with different outfits in different surroundings. This is some encouraging views that we don't need really actors who are pretending to be one of them in local environments. Yes, Dr. Kisilova is the project manager of the TRUEDEM project. Tina?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Very, very interesting presentation. I had a question around the concept of expertise versus how it was measured in the survey. So if I understood correctly, Giddens defined expertise as sort of trust in abstract systems based on some specialized knowledge, so detached from some personal familiarity. And in this study, it seems that the item that was used to capture it, whether MPs are well informed about the lives of people like the respondent, it to me, it sort of appears to measure quite closely this some kind of local knowledge or contextual embeddedness. So it would be expected that this probably would be the strongest at the local level and at the same time quite closely tied to this perceived proximity. And I was wondering how this was reconciled with the claim that this item would actually reflect this faceless commitment or systemic expertise rather than some relational form of trust. Thank you.
Thank you for this remark. You're completely right that it's a bit of a workaround, and perhaps this item obviously does not address this very technocratic expertise and knowledge, but what we tried or aimed also concerning the first question from Professor Norris was to reflect on to actually merge different ways of gathering expertise. And as I said, I think also considering the first question, that's what it's all about, that of course one can engage in personal contacts with citizens, but we have loads of expertise. And in social sciences, we have hundreds, thousands of studies and opinion surveys where politicians can gather this knowledge about living conditions and opinions. And there we get closer to this more expert knowledge and perhaps technocratic knowledge. So consulting opinion service, researchers' results, engaging with science also provides perhaps an even more profound basis of knowledge of living conditions and opinions. So I agree, you're right. It's from the wording quite close to the citizens, to the life words of citizens and so on, but not exclusively from our point of view. And I think that's something that is overlooked very often, that engaging with citizens is one way, but another way could be to engage more with social sciences themselves. And when I attended a conference last year, there was a panel where an expert on migration policy joined the discussion, and she was asked why all those results they gather in their research so slowly enter the political discourse. And she said that's actually the main problem. All those results are there. You just have to use it. So everything is known. Social science provides this expertise and knowledge about opinions and very well done research on quality of life, living conditions, and so on, but it's still not used that often for whatever reason.
There's also interaction between closeness and access. For example, when I was living in Lower Austria, I had no idea who is my MP. If you ask me who is your MP, I have no idea. Same in Vienna, when I live in Vienna, who is the MP which I voted for, say in the 9th district around university? Nobody can tell me that, because we have these lists. we vote for a party. Whereas if I'm in Britain, if I'm in Colchester, in Essex, or in London, or in Glasgow, I see the office of this MP and his name or her name. So you can just pop in and say, hello, you are my MP, I have a complaint, and can I talk with you? In Austria, you can't do that. They are not available. They are hiding in parliament, in the regional parliament, the national parliament, European parliament, whereas in some systems, like in the UK, you know exactly who is your MP and you know exactly whom to visit. And there's a big difference between this closeness and access, because every voter in the UK knows where to go. In Austria or in Germany, we have no idea. You just write some letter to some Kronenzeitung, some daily. But this is a big difference between democratic representation and closeness. Pippa Norris, Harvard.
So one way to think that through in terms of expanding it is obviously to look at a system, a mixed system like Germany, where members of the Bundestag would have two different roles depending on where they're elected from. And of course, there are lots of other mixed systems now which are existing in Eastern and Central Europe. And then also one could look at things like the measuring the distance, the district magnitude from the capital to the constituency, or the number of populations per district or whatever, to test some of these effects. And then the other thing one could do is look at the comparative candidate study, because that's where you get it's a very good study. It's been done now on a couple of occasions anyway, and it's cross-national, and it allows you to look at their roles and responsibilities, and members of parliament, do they do much constituency service, which varies a lot, not just by seniority, i.e. backbenchers do more than ministers, but by gender, women do more than men. But also one could then do some of these questions about trust in a constituency, in a system where you have a high level of constituency service on a comparative basis. So there might be some fun ways to think about this in terms of future research using other data sets and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I respond?
Of course, please.
Yeah, concerning this contextual effects or effects of the political system, I presented this chart about preferences for representational styles, a paper I've recently submitted and which is under review, and we engaged a lot in those contextual factors, checking the importance of district magnitude, of electoral systems, open lists, mixed, proportional, everything. But still, when working with this data set, we found that contextual factors do not matter that much. So when you remember the bar charts on trust in parliaments, I mean, there is some variation, but not that much we would expect from those contextual factors. And I've also presented this table on constituency work. So, I mean, another angle that is present or discussed in research is that it's also very much a matter of individual engagement still of MPs. So they have this role, this institutional roles, but they have some room for maneuver to set up their own preferences, accents. Some of them like to engage more in direct contact with citizens, others are more into media or social media and so on. So I think we now address parliaments as collective actors, but we also find a huge variety among individual MPs in this regard.
And if I could just follow up on that, Elizabeth, does that mean that you could actually do a nice mixed data set, a multi-level analysis? So you pick your parliamentarians and do the analysis of which ones are most interested in doing constituency service, or other things like basically pork barrel, which is very common in America, where you deliver services through what you're doing. And so you have an individual member and you can classify those more or less, and then local, and then you can also look at the local voters and then see what their response is by doing the European Social Survey or the CSES or something like that, where you could match across. Useful?
Thank you. May I ask Professor Chabada if he's around, because there are two regions in Czech Republic. Is the pattern of this closeness issue in Czechia similar across regions, or are there regional differences from your experience as National Director of Czech Republic? I don't know if Ladislav is listening to that. Anyway. Another question was to Elizabeth. You have Catalonia, Barcelona, which is famous for having other ideas, and the second region. Is the difference between Catalonia, who wants to be independent, and the other region not as big as supposed, or are the Catalonians different?
Concerning your first question, I mean, I'm not the expert in the Czech Republic, but
Yeah.
I mean, what's also struck us throughout the whole analysis of this data set was that, I mean, we have been interested in regions and regional parliaments, but obviously it occurred that still the national patterns are very dominant. So regions, two regions in one country behave quite similar, share similar attitude patterns. So the national frame is still very, very important and dominant. So that's the thing to say about the Czech Republic, perhaps. And concerning the Spanish regions, once again, the Catalonian respondents do not differ that much from the region of Extremadura, which we have chosen as a second region. Perhaps what we can see in our data, which has also been found in previous research, is that still the commitment of the Catalonians, MPs and citizens towards the EU is very high, but driven perhaps by the hopes that the EU will support aspirations for autonomy. So that's something that can also be seen in our data. So compared to other regions and other countries, the Catalonians rate very high on those items.
Yeah, this means the national patterns are stronger than regional deviations in Tyrol, which is encouraging for these nation states that they have a nationwide pattern and not a Tyrolean and not Austrian pattern. That's also encouraging for us studying these different levels, that not everything falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, of course, one always is concerned with the notion of methodological nationalism and engages with this issue. And I think it's important to check those aspects from time to time to dig deeper into the levels and see, is this national framework still the very dominant, and is it necessary and efficient to go to other levels or cross border networks and so on. So it's important to check this from time to time, but we have to admit and see it from our data that the national frameworks are quite dominant.
Very impressive, thank you. Are there any other questions from the participants? Xenia?
Yes, thank you. A short question. Does the perceived expertise increases among the respondents who are more often interacting with their MPs, who reported that they met or sent some online communication or etc.?
Yeah, we haven't checked on this. I have to admit, and it's a good remark and a good point. And of course, everything is also associated and connected with education in the background and so on. So I mean, we checked for multicollinearity and there are no huge issues in this regard, but it's always something I think that we, as researchers in political representation issues, are aware of, that education matters, knowledge matters, and so on, and that these things are connected. But thank you, that's a good remark, and we should check this.
For future studies, it might be interesting to compare Lombardia and Italy with Sicily to follow Putnam, because it would be exciting, because Lombardia is the richest region in the European Union and Sicily is the poorest, and to see if the quality of life and so on has an impact on your issues. This would be interesting for me to compare Lombardia and Sicily, because it's sort of the method of biggest difference in terms of GDP per capita, etc. But it doesn't mean that there is not a national pattern in Palermo like in Milano. So, but this is just exciting. If you make a new study, please think about Lombardia and Sicily. Thank you.
We actually had Italy in our research plan, but since we also conducted this survey among regional MPs, we dropped it in the citizen survey because, as you perhaps can imagine, this our survey among regional MPs was really a challenge, and it costed us a lot of resources to gather these responses, and we struggled a lot in Italy. So we regret this a lot, but then we decided for the citizen survey to concentrate on those regions and countries where we have somehow sufficient number of regional MPs as well. But of course, Italy is an interesting case.
Yes, David Putnam got famous with it, and now it's your turn in the next round. Okay, are there any other? As I said, Professor Zabada is the PI for Czech Republic in our project, and Dr. Cesembilek is the PI for Mongolia in the World Real Survey. So we have 5 minutes left. Any last words?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and the discussion and your remarks and ideas for further research, also connecting with other data sets. And yeah, I mean, when we engage in our papers, we always get the feedback that the data set we collected is quite interesting because of these regional MPs and because we have been able to get a quite interesting number of respondents in this regard, and that we can compare it to the citizens in the respective regions as well. But yeah, there's still a lot to do for us, and concerning your ideas, we can even connect to other data sets. So quite interesting.
Absolutely. And we have a new data set on trust in democracies in Austria and other countries. And people, you want to say something?
I was just going to follow up on that, Christian, with the same thought. So we have, including in our survey in 24 countries, how you evaluate your regional authorities, and also how you trust your regional authorities. So there's 2 different items, well, a battery of items on evaluation, and that covers about 200 different regional levels units. And so you've got enough variation there, along with the other controls in the survey. And it's a survey of the electorate in each of these. And particularly I've been doing this recently, you pull the data across different countries and different systems, and then you can look at how far, for example, the evaluations are closely linked to trust, which they are. But then what you also can do, which is what I'm doing now, is multi-level analysis, where I'm looking at performance indicators of the regions. And that gives us a much better sense of the relationship between the actual performance, according to our data. Things like the NUTS data is always available at NUTS 2. Then you've also got the evaluations, and then you've also got the trust. So I'll be presenting some of that at our forthcoming conference, which is just in another week or so. And I've got a draft paper which I'm working on for that, so I'll be able to send you that. But it's also a source that you might be interested in yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. So,
Welcome.
yeah, as I said, I think it's always worth checking the regional level, and I'm happy that many data sets today include, for example, the NUTS regions. So
Yes.
they allow for this analysis also at the regional level, although we might find the national level being quite dominant, but still we can check those influence factors as well. And what we tried, as you have recognized, is to capture all levels, to ask for local, regional, national, and European parliaments, which is, of course, another challenge for our respondents. We really tried to engage in the translation of our questionnaires and provide the country-specific names for the different assemblies or parliaments to ease the task for the respondents, but nevertheless, it's quite challenging for sure.
It is, and again, the inconsistencies of NUTS regions is a problem, and then the lack of availability of certain sorts of indicators is another problem. So there's lots of difficulties, but I just think it really maximizes our variance, which makes it much more powerful as a design. Thanks.
Yeah, so the innovation of Professor Norris was in our project to go from NUTS 1 to NUTS 2 also, and have both levels as far as possible. I think this is a big innovation in methodology of this comparative research. Okay, so as Professor Norris said, and also Dr. Kieselova, we have a big conference in Poland in November, and you're invited to join in the hybrid form. And we have also a conference in January in Brussels, where we are talking with MPs, and this is in the planning at the moment. Okay, Professor Donat, thank you very much for your interesting paper, and greetings to my beloved Wachau and Krems. And I encourage you to carry on with the research because it's very interesting also for us. And congratulations on the presentation. And you can admire yourself in YouTube from tomorrow onwards. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and goodbye to everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.